There's a stowaway on our fishing boat. I'm pretty sure he's not human. We started noticing strange occurrences about halfway through our fishing expedition. A fishing boat is never a normal place to begin with, I suppose. Everything is always tipping back and forth, sliding around, so it's easy to ignore when things get moved or when things disappear. But it started happening more and more, and it seemed unusual to me, even with the ship's constant heaving and swaying. I decided to begin writing about the events in question to try to make sense of what was happening. What I came up with will likely be met with skepticism. They may even commit me, so I'll leave it here just for the record, in case they try to sweep this under the rug. That's assuming I ever make it back at all. Like I said, about halfway through our journey, traversing the freezing waters of the Bering Sea, I began to feel as if I was being watched. When I was eating in the galley, rinsing off in the shower, but especially when I was in the cabin doing wheel watch at night, in the darkness of the small, creaky room swaying back and forth, pitching to and fro upon the backs of massive waves like titans rolling in their sleep. It felt like ice burning into the back of my head always. I didn't tell the guys about it at first, but then I noticed they were acting out of sorts as well. The crew had taken on an odd and disquieted silence. There were no more good-natured barbs, no more pranks or jokes, the usual bullshitting, talk of banging each other's sisters and mothers, loud farting and belching, and the ensuing hooting and hollering, laughing and jesting. All the things which men did when they were hundreds of miles away from the nearest woman. All those things were suddenly, strangely absent. The captain noticed it, too. At dinner one evening he broke the silence and spoke quietly, under his breath. He had insisted that night to put on some music, and had turned it up to full blast. You boys feel it, too, the eyes on the backs of your heads. He said it quietly, so that his words were buried by the music and barely audible to us. We all nodded in unison. Then I found myself surprised. "What is it?" I asked. "I don't know. I can't make sense of it, but I can't keep ignoring it." I wasn't going to say anything at first because it was barely noticeable, but now the food's going missing too. Little things, a box of mac and cheese here, a stick of butter there, but enough that I've started to notice. And before any of you say anything, I know it's not you boys taking stuff you ain't supposed to. We've been doing this together long enough. I think I can trust you all that much. If I'm wrong, speak up, but I don't think I'm wrong. No one said anything for a minute. Do we have enough food left for the rest of the trip? The somewhat ample-bellied Chris asked, breaking the silence, his eyes now wide and filled with fear. There should be. Yeah, I mean, we can always eat some of those fish we're catching if we have to, right? We all snickered at that, somewhat nervously. The bigger question is, how the hell did somebody get aboard out here in the middle of the damn ocean? The water's freezing, for one thing, and for another there ain't no place to hide. I checked the engine room, the hold, everywhere a man could conceivably fit to stow away. There's nothing, no signs of anyone. I can't make sense of it, but I know he's here somewhere, hiding in the damn walls for all I know. I shuddered at the thought of that, suddenly thinking back to the creaking noises in the cabin at night. Were those from a man hiding in the walls, watching me? 2 days later I was in the galley with the captain when we noticed an entire day's worth of food was gone from the fridge. The cupboards were suddenly beginning to look bare as well. "This is insane," How can one man eat so much food? The captain whispered this to me under his breath. We had stopped bothering to put the music on for our conversations. The feeling of someone watching us grew stronger by the day, never abating. We all felt it, as if he was everywhere at once, whoever he was. How sure are we that it's just one man? I went up to the deck and found the rest of the crew toiling away up there. It was past noon, and we were all beginning to feel hungry. Part of me was worried how they would react to this news. The food for today is gone, I told them, looking each one in the eyes. Our friend has been raiding the cupboards again, and the fridge. Damn it, Mick threw the heavy line he had in his arms to the deck, and the expertly wound loop went into disarray on the wet wooden floorboards. You're behind this. Hess stalked towards me, pointing his finger into my chest, digging it into my sternum painfully. You probably been eating it. I knew it from the first time I laid eyes on ya. You're weak. We should never let you on the damn boat in the first place. The man attacked me suddenly, and without warning. His eyes were black as the sea at night, full of hate and rage. He was holding my coveralls in his fists, and before I knew it he had me hanging over the edge of the railing. The man was bigger than me and strong as hell. I felt my feet and lower half beginning to tip overboard as gravity threatened to take me toppling over the side. My entire body was nearly over the edge, and I was looking down at the water below me, freezing cold, deep and dark as death itself. The mist and waves splashed up in my face, shocking me with icy blasts of frozen spray. That was when the rest of the crew yanked him off of me, grabbing onto my pants and pulling me up just as I was about to fall down into the icy water below. What the hell are you doing, Mick? It's not him. Has been with us the whole time. The captain said it himself. There's somebody else on board. Bullshit, he spat at us, held back by the other men. His eyes still looked strange and black to me, as if all the color had been drained from them. ITS him, fucking greenhorn. Can't take IT. As trying to get him to turn back. So we all starve this year. Well, I ain't fucking going back. We're staying out on the water for as long as it takes. Am not a greenhorn, you asshole. I've been working with you for the last 6 years. Ha, he started to laugh at that, saying I was and would always be. I would never be as good as them, as fast. I couldn't understand where all of this was coming from. We had always gotten along, Mick and I. Sure, there was the odd bar fight in town, but those were usually good-natured and could have happened with anyone. Whatever problems we'd had in the past, we both always apologized afterwards and bought each other a drink. This wasn't him talking. They pulled Mick away and locked him in his bunk room to cool down. 6 hours later he was still screaming his head off, and the captain decided it was time to call a meeting to discuss our options. There's 2 things we can do, obviously, said Captain John. We can work one man short, since Mick is no longer playing with a full deck, or head back to port, weigh in with what we've got, lose a bunch of money on fuel, not to mention a bunch of time, and get somebody from in town to come back out with us. Assuming we can find somebody, right? I'm sure we can get someone. But how good there is gonna be another story. Now, obviously, I'm gonna make the call, but am open to suggestions, since this isn't exactly a normal trip. You all are gonna be the ones working short-handed. You think you can handle it? We all nodded our agreement. If fishing was good, we could be done in a week. Working short would suck, but it would mean probably another month at sea. For the same amount of money if we went back to get a new man. All right, we don't talk about this to anyone when we get back. Got it. And the law out here, technically, but I don't want word getting out about this. So we went back to our duties, one man down, short on food, now eating fish that we caught from the water to make up for lost meals. All the while, Mick was in his bunk room, strangely silent, no longer screaming and hollering, just quietly waiting, biding his time. The next couple days were mostly uneventful. We went about our jobs without much talk, just silently doing our work and trying to forget about the crazed man inside who not long before we had called our friend. The captain tried to talk to him through the door, and his growing insanity was scaring us all tremendously. He talked about the darkness mostly, and the depths, the cold ocean, and the blackness of the deep, how he wanted to go there once he was full and satisfied, but that he was still hungry. Mick's voice started to change. It became a deep, booming baritone, somehow lulling and hypnotic in its cadence and rhythm. That was when we started to find Captain John standing outside in the hallway, eyes nearly closed, silently rocking back and forth. We had to pull him away from the door at one point, as his hand began to reach for the latch, without his apparent knowledge. When we asked him about it afterwards, he said he had done no such thing. He flashed a strange smile at me that night at dinner as well. The after-image of it stayed in my mind and made it difficult to sleep that night. All I could think was weren't his eyes light blue before. Now they looked darker, navy blue almost. Perhaps it was just the light, but my paranoia would not let me sleep. The next night it was my turn to do wheel watch. Captain John called me up to the cabin and told me gruffly that he was going to bed. He was dead tired. I sat silently behind the wheel in the dark room, trying not to fall asleep. It was exceedingly difficult as the night wore on. The day had been long, and the hours extended since we were down a man. What awoke me was a noise, someone whispering to me from behind the walls. "Your friends, what the hell? Who's here? Get us aid to the open waters." My heart was hammering loudly in my chest. I began to scream in terror and woke everyone up. They came slowly marching in a row up to the cabin, their eyes all now black as coal, shining dimly in the light of the cabin. "Hez here, Hez behind the wall." "Yes, what did he sassy?" Captain John asked, no longer any hint of color in his eyes. He laid a hand on my shoulder, and I realized it was wet, dampening my shoulder beneath the shirt. I saw the floor was soaked beneath their feet, where each of them stood, drenching the carpet beneath them. They smelled of kelp and ocean water. Mick approached from behind them, and I realized they had unlocked the door to his bunk room. He appeared to be soaking wet. His hair and clothes were drenched. Clear liquid dripped off of his hands steadily onto the floor, where a growing pool began to form. "We need somebody to work the wheel, Jason," he said wetly. "You're our man. He is hungry, and we must work quickly to feed him." I realized by looking into his unthinkable eyes that I had no choice but to agree. "My crewmates are his now. We search the frozen waters for fish, constantly moving, never resting. They are completely taken over by him now, and I watch from the cabin behind the wheel as they work the nets and the lines. I am careful not to anger him. Our stowaway, I do not want to end up like them, if it can be avoided. It seems like it will take quite a while for him to be finally satisfied. Has eaten everything on the ship, including our entire quota for the season, leaving me starving and alone in the wheelhouse, waiting for this to finally be over one day. My futile hope is that he's full before I run out of fuel. Somehow, though, I don't think he will ever be satisfied. He'll keep us out here for as long as he can, and then once there's nothing left of us but salt water washed away in the ocean, spray, he'll leave and find another boat where he can stow away and begin to feed again. Story 2. I used to be on a boat. Now I can't even look at the water. I worked a shrimp boat called the Melissa on the Gulf. Hot, sweaty work, but all the shrimp you can eat. So there's that. Captain Mike was my boss, a wizened old salt, rough around the edges, but a good man and a good boss. I worked with him out on the open waters for years before we split. Here's what happened. So one day we were out early in an attempt to beat the other boats and get a good haul. I start cranking up the nets, position them over the collecting bin, and let them go. Whole shit ton of shrimp this morning. Today is going to be a good and profitable trip at this rate. I look up at the nets, and I see something caught up in it, probably driftwood, but I gotta get it down or it'll rip the nets. I drop them down so I can pull it off. It's definitely not driftwood. I don't know what it is. It looks like a small arm, like a child's arm, but it's not. It's a mottled green with brown flecks, but the texture almost seems like shark skin. Thin, long fingers, almost 5 inches long. I almost can't call them fingers. They're webbed to one another with a thin layer of skin, almost translucent in the sun. I've never seen anything like it. Short pointed claws where fingernails would be in a person. I look down to the end of the arm, and I see it's been twisted and broken, caught in the nets. At the end it looks like it was sawn or gnawed off in a hurry by something dull. Dark red blood drips off it, pooling on the deck. I must been in a trance staring at the odd thing, because the next thing I remember is Captain Mike screaming at me, "Get that fucking thing off the boat right now." I snap and quickly work it free, tossing it in the water as fast as I can. Some of the blood stains my hands and my shirt, but I rinse it off. Not the first time something's bled on me out here. As I clean up, I realize that Mike has turned the boat around. We're heading back to port. It's not even 10 and he's calling it a day. I have bills to pay, and maybe 100 pounds of shrimp ain't gonna cut it. I'm about to have a few words with the captain, but one look at him, and I see something is clearly off. He keeps glancing at the sides of the boat as he speeds up. While in tidying up, I see him pull out the emergency flare gun and check it, pulling out the extra flares too. I guess this is the time to bother him. We get back, and as I finish up, Mike comes over to me and palms me for $100. Hell of a lot more than I'd make normally. As I take the money, his hand grabs mine tightly and he pulls me in. Today's a short day. The extra is for you to keep quiet about why we had a short day. All right. See you tomorrow. He lets my hand go and starts looking to the water. He seems lost, uneasy. This is a man who spent his whole damn life on a boat. I feel uncomfortable just seeing how uncertain he is. Yeah, I guess. Go out and have a few drinks. I know I will. Odd morning, but with pay like this, I hope I find one of those arm things every damn day. That evening I find myself at the local bar, closest one to the waterfront, where all the working stiffs congregate. We've been buying rounds for a few hours, bullshitting around about work and sex and general nothings. I've got a pretty good load on, and my curiosity gets the better of me. I ask in a low tone, "So what's the strangest thing you've ever brought up in the nets?" And don't fucking say tires. I mean, a whole car would be weird, but a tire's like all the time. I get a couple answers who once found one of those inflatable sex dolls. Rick found a box with a whole set of Encyclopedia Britannicas. John found not one individual but a pair of boots. Not that that's odd. What was odd is that they were his exact size. Hell, he was even wearing them. I push a little further, yeah. But you ever see anything like a natural, like you couldn't explain it? I get a chorus of nah, but Kirk suddenly gets real quiet and starts staring intently at the sweat beating off his glass. I think I got all I can now, information-wise. Now for a couple more beers. Am flushed today. My alarm goes off dutifully at 7:30 the next morning, and I dutifully go off at my alarm in a swarm of profanity. My head feels like it's going to explode. I wish it would. I dutifully crack open a club soda, swallow some ibuprofen, and turn up a hot shower. By 8 o'clock I'm recovering and on my way to the docks. I wander up to the Melissa, Captain Mike's boat, as muttering something under his breath, staring at the deck. The deck's been all scratched to hell, deep long rakes intently scratching all over the place, most of them seeming to congregate where the nets release, where the blood spilled yesterday. I stand behind Mike for a couple minutes until he acknowledges me. "Not going out today, not like this, sorry." "All right, but I gotta work, you know. I'm gonna ask around, see if anyone else is short a deckhand." "Do what you gotta do. See you tomorrow, yeesher." I luck out and find another boat short a man. I like Mike, worked with him for years, but I work for paper, not a man. If he doesn't get his shit together, he'll have to find another ship. We have an uneventful day out on the other ship. Am at the docks again, 8 a.m. sharp. Captain's got a whole load of bleach and cleaners. I wonder what's up. He'll pay you double if you help me lay the scrapes off, bleach down the whole thing, and refinish the deck. These scrapes and stains are bad for the boat. Shit, that's a lot of work. But double pay is double pay. Mike might be losing it, but I won't stop him from paying that much. I agree, it's a long day, much harder than our usual trips out. Still profitable. Before I leave, Mike asks me to help him pull down the nets. That request stands out to me as they're a bitch to move, heavy and unwieldy. You usually only do it if you've got a rip or something, but these are perfectly good. As I leave, I see Mike pile them up on the beach, pour some diesel on top, and light them up. Doesn't make any sense burning good nets like that. And wyverning, after working my hands and back that hard, I need a beer. I head out to the bar. I spot Kirk at the bar and fall, and next to him we talk a bit, starting with the weather. For other people that may sound like tepid conversation, but out on the water it's vital information. Eventually I get enough in me, and we start talking about our boats. Bitching about the bosses, it starts off as a good-natured pressure release. But when I start bitching about all the extra work I had to do today with the deck and the nets, Kirk cuts me off abruptly. "Is not crazy. You need to find another boat, maybe somewhere a little further up the coast." That's all I get out of him, as like a stone wall after that. I'd assumed Mike had had a couple too many years under the sun, baking his brains, but Kirk is usually pretty good with advice. Still, the next morning I head in to talk to Mike. We finish restoring the decks. Now as on talking about possible residue on the sides or the propellers. Says he wants to scrape those down next. This is crazy. It's way beyond a two-man job. You need to dry dock a boat for all he wants. It's the start of the season. I know he doesn't have enough cash lying around for that. I spend the day trying to pressure wash the sides of the boat as a cheaper fix. The end of the day, Mike slips me a few hundred and looks me right in the eye. I don't want to go out there, not with a ship like this. It's not ready. All right, but if there's no work for me, I need to look elsewhere. I understand. It's been good. He gives me a firm handshake and looks me right in the eye. Something is welling behind those eyes, but he fights it back. He turns to organize up the ropes. I notice that he's got a heavy revolver clip to his side. It's not unusual for a boat to have a gun on board, but a hand cannon on your person. I'm starting to really worry about Mike. This is not normal behavior, and not sure if I can talk about this to anyone just yet. I flounder a bit but find a job after a few days. I still see Captain Mike cleaning off the Melissa every day, and I go to the docks. He's there scrubbing when I leave, and he's still scrubbing when I get back. There are new scrapes all over the hull, like something was scratching its way climbing up. Mike's become a pariah on the docks. No one wants to talk about it, and when they do, it's in low, hushed tones. Eventually, Captain Mike decides Melissa is finally clean, or he can't afford to go on without another day's bounty. He hires Carlos, the new guy on the docks, and they go out. I make a point of breaking the silence and talk to Mike to check in after they return at the end of the day. They've been catching much less than usual, like half if not worse. Still, he's getting back out on the water, and that's got to be good for him. Carlos says he's been a little freaked out by the sharks that seem to tail them. I try to put him at rest, tell him sharks aren't that big a deal. They're really just opportunistic bastards. I lie and make him feel a little better. Is that really Allie? One day the Melissa doesn't come back. I wait at the docks searching the horizon. It gets dark. Mike doesn't usually stay out this late. I go to the bar and try to drink my body weight in vodka. Weeks later, another captain finds the Melissa floating a few miles out to sea. I wasn't there, so the rest is hearsay and rumor. The police report is still sealed. Apparently it was a bloodbath. Blood dried onto the decks, most of it right under the nets. Pieces of viscera scattered everywhere, at least the pieces the seagulls hadn't eaten. The pilot room saw some of the worst of it. Dust guts spread everywhere, some tufts of hair and skin too, like someone was flayed by someone who either didn't know what they were doing or was too enthusiastic to do it right. Mike used to sit there when we were out. Mike's revolver was found there too, for shots fired, but no idea if anyone was hit. Who could even tell whose blood belonged to who? In the deck they found a long piece of metal embedded deep in the wood. Looked like it was piece of an old boat anchor. It had been crudely sharpened. The investigation wrapped up. Definitely foul play was the conclusion. Maritime law says that dead boats found at sea become property of whoever finds them. Here's the thing, the captain who found it wanted absolutely no part of it, refused to even set foot on it. He had it sunk over by the reefs. He even took his own ship and put it in the dry docks for the season to scrape off the wood and have it sanitized and refinished. He was talking about selling it and moving up to different places. He said the waters weren't as hospitable as they used to be. Story 3. My GF and I got stranded on a desert island after I crashed her dad's boat. I should never have gone off exploring alone. Day 1. So it looks like Caitlin's dad was right. I won't live to see 40. I suppose you've got to give credit where it's due. Although, in fairness, that prick thought I'd wind up flatlining under a bridge with a needle sticking out of my ass, not stranded on a desert island. Anyway, my name's George, and this is my diary. I always thought these things were a bit stupid and pointless, still do. But Caitlin's asleep, and I've run out of pebbles to skip across the water. So here's the story so far. Once the tide rolled and the boat drifted off and sank. Cat and I escaped by jumping overboard, but she landed badly on a rock. Now her left ankle is an ugly purple bruise. She keeps insisting it doesn't hurt all that much, but this is a woman who could look on the bright side of a black hole, so take that for what it's worth. I salvaged some supplies from the wreckage, including a water bottle, the food we brought along, crackers, cheese, a pineapple, 3 bananas, some beef jerky, a knife, this little notebook, binoculars, and a flashlight. I also held onto Caitlin's gift, although I can't say more about that in case she reads this later, which if you are, Angel Facci. Sorry for ruining your 31st birthday. Earlier, I joked about having the beach to ourselves and how romantic the sunset looked. Caitlin half laughed, half sobbed. I can tell she's anxious the rescue mission might take a while, since it's unlikely anybody even realizes we're missing yet. Call that karma for using her parents' summer house without permission. So far, the weather's great. Not too hot, not too cold. It's the perfect time of year to get shipwrecked, I guess. At low tide, red and orange crabs swarm over the seaweed-covered rocks in the bay, but they scurried into the water whenever I got to close. The yappy seabirds are way too fast to catch as well. Still, if we're careful, we can stretch out our supplies to last a week or so. I mean, no Bear Grylls, but that's how it looks. The island doesn't seem all that big, although it's hard to tell because there's trees and valleys everywhere. Tomorrow the plan is for me to head inland and see how alone we really are. If I get lost, I'll walk until I hit the coast and follow it back here. It's like keeping one hand against a maze wall. Best case scenario, there's other people around, maybe a lighthouse keeper or an eccentric billionaire who owns the place. If not, fingers crossed some passing fisherman spot Caitlin. Anyway, that's all for now. Ciao. Day 2. Okay, so there's some crappy news, some amazing news, and some seriously shitty news. First, the crappy news. The island's bigger than I thought, and there's bushes, ferns, and tall grass everywhere, which means it's impossible to take more than 20 steps in a single direction. Out east, I found a rocky mound. It was 80 foot high and fairly steep, but there were exposed roots and boulders I could use for grip, which meant I reached the summit before dusk. That leads us on to the amazing news. Up there, I looked around through the binoculars and spotted a shack and a rowboat on the southern side of the island way in the distance. They're on a narrow stretch of beach surrounded by a cove. The problem is, navigating the island's gonna be tricky. To cross it, we'll need to march through a dense forest with bald patches covered in bumpy hilltops. Solo, I could make the journey in a day, I think. When Kat heard the news, she jumped up then grimaced while holding her ankle. Because of the limited supplies, time is against us. She suggested I go solo then. If the shack's unoccupied, row the boat around to collect her without slamming into a rock this time, although I'm against this suggestion for two reasons. Number one, that would mean splitting the supplies, and we've only got one water bottle. Number two is the shitty news. There's 3 crucifixes planted beside the shack, spaced out in the sand. That feels like an excessive amount. What if some recluse started a cult out here where they could perform crazy ritual sacrifices? Hell, maybe those crosses mark the graves of previous castaways. Part of me thinks we might not want to meet this individual or individuals. That said, the alternative is dying of a painful thirst and getting our eyeballs pecked out by gulls. I suppose it's possible whoever built the place is long gone, although I doubt they'd have left their boat in that case. Kat got me laughing a while back. My hands look like they've gone through a paper shredder because of the climb, which set her off grumbling about infections. I pointed at her inflated ankle and said I'd be a real asshole if I cried about some measly cuts. She's always been like that, more concerned about others than herself. Now I think about it, she's in a weirdly upbeat mood. Even for her, she keeps joking about how we might want to stay lost rather than have her dad find out what happened. It's better than her writhing around in agony, I guess. Since she looked drained, I let her rest her ankle on my lap while I massaged her shoulders. I'd be lying if I said part of me didn't enjoy being her guardian angel for a change. Anyway, that'll do for now. Adios. Day to entry 2. Angel Fachi found her gift while I was off exploring. That's why she kept making jockish no's her dad's gonna have a stroke. When he finds out I sunk his precious boat and proposed to his daughter in the same week, she slipped the ring back into the bag, but she couldn't have been more obvious. She grew a tail and started wagging it. She says the ring's perfect, which came as a relief. I can picture her dad casually mentioning the one he bought his wife cost $25,000. To celebrate our engagement, I went and picked some pink wildflowers. Afterwards, we had beef jerky, followed by pineapple chunks. To cap the evening off, we lay down and held each other. The warmth of her body felt nice. This is so typical me. I get engaged to the most beautiful woman on the planet days before deranged cultists carve out my intestines. I shouldn't make those kind of jokes. Think positive. George, au revoir, day 3. Last night Caitlin heard a twig snap from out in the forest. She grabbed the flashlight, but any time she pointed the beam we only saw branches shake and dip. Neither of us moved or said a single word, just listened to the hypnotic ocean waves. Then, right as my eyelids drooped shut, Kat shrieked. She insisted a tiny pair of arms wrapped around a trunk like somebody was hugging it from behind. For the next few hours, every minor sound, even just the whistling wind, made her yelp and waste more battery power searching the spaces between trees. At dawn, I suggested a boar maybe picked up the scent of jerky and came sniffing around, and soon Caitlin had a purple face to match her ankle. She accused me of calling her delusional, which I didn't. Since our stomachs wouldn't quit grumbling, we finished the leftover jerky and washed it down with some water. Unfortunately, my blistered hands couldn't hold on to the stupid bottle. so a portion of our reserve leaked into the sand, which made Cat snap and say her dad was right about me. We tested whether she could walk alone. She barely managed 10 steps in the sand, which means the island's gonna be borderline impossible. Problem is, my strength's dipping every day. The supplies are dangerously low, and unless the potential cult leader is both real and friendly, he'll need to haul Cat through the forest and then paddle us both to the mainland. Oh, I almost forgot. She insisted we waste even more energy by relocating to the far side of the bay. There's a ridge against our backs here. After I laid out our supplies on a flat patch of rock, Cat apologized for her earlier jab. We kissed and made up and agreed we'll set off tomorrow, no matter what. Fingers crossed a single banana and some cheese keeps me fueled up. All we can do now is wait. Day 4. It came back. Sometime after dark, Caitlin pointed out a glowing set of eyes moving between trees. They slipped out of view when I shouted, "Who's there?" Wood snapped. Then the moonlight shining through the branches blacked out as something swooped from left to right. Caitlin screamed. I pointed the beam, but only saw leaves floating down. To preserve the battery, I only used the flashlight whenever we heard or spotted movement. Each time I flicked, the switch twigs snap or footsteps trampled through dead leaves. This went on and on. By dawn, it felt like I'd doused my eyes with salt water. My parched throat still aches from the big blowout. Caitlin and I had about how much of the last banana I was eating. She only shut up when I told her she could have more if she carried herself. Our remaining supplies got crammed inside the pack. Together, they weigh between 10 and 15 pounds, which feels like a lot when you haven't had a proper meal in almost a week. Even though I only half-carried, half-hugged Her Royal Highness, it felt like hauling a boulder around on my shoulders. At one point I mentioned this, and she shoved me away, and since then she's only answered my questions with childish, one-word responses. Further inland, the ground got bumpy. Those hills weren't steep, but they never ended. The amount of time we wasted catching our breaths is ridiculous. Every bird taking off made us jump. Also, we tripped on every fucking tree root, then would waste time fighting again. We pushed on until my leg muscle started spasming, then stopped inside a ring of trees. There's crisscrossed branches everywhere, plus a gap in the canopy. I napped so I can keep watch all night. If that thing followed us here, we're fucked. Dad, if you're reading this, sorry for being such a shit before. I always meant to repay your love and kindness when I started doing better financially. P.S. You were right. I should have stayed in school. Day 6, I think. We're fucked. Last night, that thing slipped between trees and bushes. I grabbed the knife and went over and kicked one, but nothing happened. I waited a while, then Caitlin screamed. There was glowing eyes above her in the canopy. The thing dropped on her and bit her. It looked pale and thin and small like a child. I couldn't tell if it was a boy or a girl. Its clothes were old and its skin peeled. When I grabbed its head, there's still wet chunks under my fingernails. It smells horrible. The creature was small but strong. My feet lifted in the air as I stabbed it in the face and neck. Its lip was all sideways. I got it in the chest before it threw me off. I thought I landed on a stick, but the snap was my ribs. Breathing is easy now. The thing hissed like a snake. Its teeth looked like needles, or a porcupine. It ran off on all fours with the knife sticking out. Caitlin's thigh looks like minced beef. Black veins are showing through. I put bandages on, and she said it burns, and kept swatting my hand away and calling me a useless fuck. After a while she said sorry. I told her sorry for fucking up our lives. I told her her dad was right. She said no, her dad's a prick. We both laughed. Then she spat out a tooth. I fucking love her so much. She needs a doctor. I didn't tell her carrying her makes it hard to breathe now. I found a blood trail, and the knife, it was in a patch of red flat grass. I'm not sure if that's good. The thing looked like a child. What if its parents live at the shack? We might be fucked. I'm a murderer. I carried her south until my feet hurt. Now we're resting. A few minutes ago she spat out another tooth. The boat can't be much further. I want to sleep, but can't in case Caitlin gets bad, so right instead. She keeps talking about how we met. I remember it well. She found me overdosing in an alley and shook me awake and said the ambulance was coming. I could only make out her pretty features and copper hair. I was so fucked up I thought I was dead. I kept asking if she was an angel and telling her she looked like one. She still looks like one. Day unknown. We found the shack. No one lives here. There's water, also jarred fruits. I ate and drank, but am afraid to sleep. Caitlin might die. There's way more crucifixes, but they'd all broken because the rope rotten, so they're bundles of sticks really. Caitlin is on the beach. She's pale and sweaty and doesn't want the heat, won't come inside either. Thrashes around whenever I try. Also, she's spitting teeth. Lots. Her lips are flaky. She keeps complaining about how thirsty she is. I give her water, but she couldn't keep it down. Second time she grabbed the ring off her finger and told me to stick it up my ass because it's cheap and shit. Whoever built this place is gone. All I found were framed photos of a man in glasses and a girl. Maybe his daughter. She looks about 7, maybe 8, and I killed her maybe. There was so much blood. Soon we're casting off. I fell asleep after the last entry. When I woke up, Caitlin had vanished. A sand trail led me south. I found her in a cave in the shadows. She was standing around like she never hurt herself, kept saying she felt fine, except she looked pale and washed out, and her lips were all cracked. I didn't like it. I didn't like how she kept asking me to come inside the cave. Her voice sounded different. I went forward slowly. When we were close, she grinned. Now I could see her eyes. They looked silver and glowy. The second I stopped, she hissed. Her teeth were sharp. I ran back here to the shack. It's getting dark, so I can't cast off. Too risky. This is so fucked. Why is she better? How? Caitlin keeps knocking the door, asking if she can come in. Am too afraid to answer. She keeps pawing at the walls and saying she's thirsty, and asking if I remember how we met. Caitlin's on the roof. I can hear footsteps. She wants me to let her in. Before she asked nice, but now she's screaming. She says I deserve to die for getting us stranded. She said she helped me through my relapses and got me clean, and she did list to her dad, saying to leave me, and I'm a terrible selfish person, and she's right. I can't stop crying. This is so fucked. Those silver eyes are watching me from a gap between boards. Cat still wants me to go outside. She keeps talking about how much she loves me. Says if I love her, I'll go outside. Nasha's crying because the thirst hurts. I love her, but I'm scared. I'm so fucking scared. This will be my last entry. Caitlin went back to the cave before dawn. Then I accidentally slept leaning against the door. When I finally went out to look around, There were silver eyes watching me from the cave. The mainland isn't far. I'm casting off. If you find this, I'm sorry I killed the girl, and I'm sorry I left Caitlin. I can't believe this is how I repay her for everything. I'm the biggest piece of shit on earth. Angel Faci, I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. Please someone rescue her. It might not be too late. Also bury the little girl. Day 1 since rescue. Writing this down is a terrible idea, but I need to get my thoughts straight. After the last entry, I pushed the boat out to sea and paddled east. Every stroke felt like a branding iron between my ribs. The marina drifted into view around midday, and then a yacht came speeding toward me. I waved it down, relieved only to discover Kat's dad was the skipper. I almost hurled myself overboard. He hauled me up onto the yacht and drove his forearm into my throat, pinning me against the cockpit. It's a miracle he didn't suffocate me. While I gasped for air, my vision all blurred, he explained how he'd called his daughter to wish her a happy birthday 1 week ago, and when neither she nor her junkie boyfriend answered their phones, he panicked. 3 days later, when a neighbor called to say his boat had disappeared, he put 2 and 2 together. Since the Coast Guard were a shower of useless bastards, his words, he launched a one-man search operation. With his story told, he eased some pressure so that I could answer one question. Where's Caitlin? When I begged for water, he drove his knee into my stomach. Breathless, I lay in the fetal position and explained how we capsized, and that I needed to leave a weakened cat behind to go summon help. If not for my feeble condition, he probably wouldn't have accepted such vague answers. Luckily, his concern for his daughter blinded him. He let me devour chicken sandwiches and orange juice while we sailed back to the island, although I think that was more so I didn't die of starvation before guiding the way. By the time we arrived, it was late afternoon. Glowing eyes watched us approach from inside the cave. I pointed feebly and said Caitlin was in there. Her dad pulled up as close as possible and insisted I go with him, probably so I couldn't leave him behind to die. We climbed overboard, into the water, and past the beach. When I refused to cross the mouth of the cave, the bastard grabbed me by the throat again. I caught him off guard with a headbutt, then blood gushed from his nostrils. A knee slammed into my chest, then 2 kicks to the midsection made me fall flat on the ground, clutching my burning ribs. If my future father-in-law hadn't spotted Caitlin lurking in the shadows, I'd probably be dead right now. He rushed forward, crying out for his baby girl, who flew straight at his chest the instant he charged beyond the light. She pinned him down, her needle-like fangs bared, and tore chunks of flesh of his neck. The anguished half-gurgle, half-scream most made me feel sorry for the guy. Almost. Caitlin stood wiping blood off her mouth. Despite the red stains, she looked more like the woman I fell in love with, less gaunt and washed out than before. She sounded like her old self, too. That sharp edge that crept into her voice after the attack had vanished. Fighting back the tears, she looked over at me and asked if she was a monster. My eyes flicked toward her father's remains, which were basically a withered husk by that point. Before I held her in my arms and said no, she kept begging for forgiveness, said she couldn't help the way she came after me before that her craving took over. A painful thirst, she kept calling it. I caressed the back of her skull, whispering this didn't change anything. Because the sunlight stung, Caitlin refused to come with me on the boat. I searched the shack for a white scarf and wrapped it around her skull, leaving a narrow slit for the eyes. But before we even got knee-deep in the ocean, the scarf bloomed pink. Caitlin's hands tightened into fists as fresh blood ran down her neck, and then she scrambled for the safety of the beach. She kept insisting being in the water felt wrong. She said that when I led her towards the cabin, too, until I invited her inside where she unwrapped her head. Beneath the scarf, her delicate features looked more beautiful than ever, crusted blood and all. We held each other, sobbing, until there were no tears left. Then, after we talked over our predicament, I set sail for the mainland to figure things out. At the marina, my disheveled appearance received some funny looks from other sailors, although nobody said anything. No doubt people are asking questions, though. Now I'm at Kat's parents' summer house. I slept in her father's bed, grilled myself a steak in his kitchen, and even drank his fancy imported beer. Apart from the aching ribs, him feeling worlds better now. Caitlin's gonna need fresh meat, or a blood bank, whatever you want to call it. I haven't decided my next move yet, but no matter what, I won't abandon her. Not after everything she's done for me. Whatever else happens, I'm sticking with my guardian angel. Kat, I love you. I'll always love you. And we're gonna figure this mess out together. Story 4. If you're ever on a boat and you see fog, please hide. At 24 years old, having a job as a crew member on a fishing boat is ideal, but it pays the bills. I don't have to commute very far, and it's only on the weekends that the hours are long. All in all, I wasn't complaining. Up until a few days ago, it was just an average job. Something happened during my shift that I can't explain, and I can't talk to anyone about it because they won't believe me. How could they? I wouldn't believe it was real if I hadn't experienced it myself. I was on deck working a two-day oversea fishing adventure. It was during the week, so there were only a few other passengers, not including myself and other crew members. The weather forecast seemed to be doable, and the waves remained pretty calm during the first half of the day. The passengers were catching fish left and right. They were happy and cheering, having a blast despite the tragic sleeping conditions they were going to face in just a few hours. The boat's not very big, definitely not up to par with any cruise ships. The sleeping cabins were small and cramped, but we offered some of the best fishing spots. The captain would always say, "My grandpa took me out here on his boat. I have the coordinates memorized. Never left empty-handed." And he was right. It was a gold mine for fish of all different kinds. It made the daunting journey out here worthwhile for the more dedicated fishermen. I had taken this trip many, many times. Nothing felt different, or gave me the impression anything was going to go wrong. Boy, I was utterly fucked and had no clue. I got up for the latter part of my shift around 8 at night. I was scheduled to keep an eye out and do after-hours cleaning on deck before the passengers woke up the next day. It was easy shit, prepping extra poles, making sure we had more than enough bait, wiping up fish guts. Ichno, the glory work of being on a fishing boat. Everyone had gone to their beds to sleep. The morning half of the expedition would begin at around 5 in the morning. I was wiping the benches when I noticed a huge blanket of fog in the distance. It was thick, almost looking solid like concrete, reaching all the way up to the sky. Now, if you've ever spent enough time on the open water, you know that fog like this can happen from time to time. Oddly enough, this particular wall of fog was tinted red. I rubbed my eyes and tried to refocus, making sure it wasn't just my eyes. Nope, there was surely a red tint. My stomach was feeling incredibly uneasy, but I tried to shrug it off. After being away from land for so long, you tend to let little things worry you. The open water of the ocean can be terrifying sometimes. I went about my normal duties, never being able to stop myself from side-eyeing the quickly approaching fog. It seemed to get even thicker the closer we got. My eyes caught a glimpse of a deep shadow nestled right on the edge, and my ass took off to where the captain was steering the ship. The door was locked, and no matter how hard I pounded on the door or how hard I shook the handle, he never bothered to open it. When I went back out directly on deck, there was nothing left to do. We were headed directly into the fog. My heart was in my throat. I had never seen anything so thick at first. It was hard to even see the water we were right on top of. I couldn't hear the water. The normal sound of the waves crashing into the side of the boat were completely muted. Red, misty air floated around me, freezing cold to the touch. Even the shadows I normally saw from the things we had on board seemed elongated, wrong. Everything seemed wrong. Suddenly, out of fucking nowhere, a deep and heavy, almost metallic grumble sounded from all around me. I was so loud my ears began to ring. The boat began to vibrate as the sound lowered to a horrifying growl. I immediately went to grab the nearest door, my feet feeling heavy, my head spinning as I tried to remain calm. Of course, the door was locked from the inside. I ran, and not ashamed to say I was in full panic mode as I ran around the boat, trying as hard as I could to find a door I could open. I wanted to be away from the fog, away from the grumbling, away from this fucking boat. The whole boat came to a halt, sending my body flying to the deck. I landed among about 6 catching nets, all reeking of blood and death. I was finally able to hear the water, but it was comforting because it sounded like it was bubbling. The fog made it feel like I was in a freezer, but it still sounded like I was on boiling water. The whole boat was surrounded. I couldn't see more than 3 feet off. Everything I could see was blurry and tinted a rusted red color. And then I saw it. Claws, grasping into the side of the boat. They belonged to black, scaled hands. I looked to the side in a frenzy, seeing an empty space under the bench I had been cleaning earlier. The benches on our boats are black, covered from the seat to the deck on the front, with an opening for personal belongings through the open underneath. It was the perfect hiding place. As quietly as I could, I scooted until my entire body was under the bench and concealed from the outside. My back was pressed against the black material, trying to make myself invisible. Thumps rang out from all sides, the clicking of nails as whatever was in the water climbed on deck. I tried to count the thumps. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 creatures were now on the boat, me being the only one on deck, not protected behind locked doors. Tears were starting to fall from the corners of my eyes, and my hand was clamped tightly over my mouth. I wanted to vanish from thin air. I wanted to be anywhere but here. Then I saw their legs. One walked directly in front of the opening I was hiding inside of. It looked wet, slimy, tinted red, but its skin was clearly black. Toenails were long and curved, digging into the deck as it stepped. I could hear a sickening clicking sound, and odd screeches and low growls, as if they were communicating with each other. The legs dripped as they walked by me, and it took everything I had to keep myself quiet, to keep from screaming. I was going to die. They were going to find me hiding. I didn't even want to know what they were going to do to me. I just hoped it'd be over fast. I couldn't stop myself from jumping when I heard the jingle of the door handles, none of them budging to open. It sounded like they went from door to door, trying to see who left one unlocked. I already knew they wouldn't be able to find one, thanking whoever was listening that the other passengers were safe. The deck was wet. Unclean floors smelled like mold and blood where I was laying. Loose fishing line and hooks were digging into my clothes. It was torture, but better than being out there with those things. I stayed, and moving for what felt like hours. I never stopped shivering and crying. I almost lost it and gagged when I heard the disgusting sloshing of the bait buckets being picked through. Fish guts and insides fell to the floor as teeth chopped through bones. I could hear them ravishing, the organs squishing in their jaws. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to imagine being at home, being in my warm bed. No worries, no death at my door. I tried to ignore the smell. I tried to forget what the fog looked like. Tried to convince myself this was a nightmare, that I'd wake up soon and it'd be over. But the boat swaying gently underneath me was a sick reminder. The sound of those claws hitting the floor. I couldn't escape, not even in my own mind. I lost count of the hours, and the creatures never stopped looking around deck, shuffling things about. At one point, one had dropped down to all fours, and I got a look at its face. My whole body froze with intense fear. Its eyes were blood red, with no pupils, just red. Its head was shaped like a human head, but it had no nose, and its jaws were bigger, homing long, sharp, and curved teeth. Blood was still dripping from its mouth. Its whole body was a shiny black, covered with scales. Slime coated every inch. My hand clenched impossibly tighter over my mouth. If the creature turned its head even a little, it'd be looking directly at me. I'm not religious, but I prayed. I wanted to live. 24 years just wasn't enough time. Thankfully, the creature stood back to its back to legs, cracking its spine as it did so. Loud, ear-shattering screeches surrounded me and made all the hair on my body stand on end. Every single one of those things made that awful noise, and just like that, with loud plops of water, they were gone. I didn't dare move until I saw the sun begin to rise and the fog began to dissipate. When I finally crawled out, my whole body was aching something awful. My eyes hurt from the light. My cheeks were raw from the freezing tears. I had never seen anything more beautiful than the open air and the sea, the fog now behind us. Within 30 minutes, the passengers came out from their rooms, all coming over and asking me if I was okay. I shook my head, unable to speak. None of them seemed fazed by last night, not that they even knew what was happening on the other side of their doors. The captain never explained to me why his door was locked, or why he wouldn't answer my desperate bangs. I forced him to take me back to land immediately, and when I got there I fell to my knees and cried until I puked. I quit my job. I haven't been on a boat since then. I never will again. If you don't believe me, I understand. But if you take one thing away from this, whenever you see a fog on the ocean, whatever you do, don't go into it. And if you have to, stay behind a closed and locked door or hide. Story 5. I worked on a crab boat. The crew has a ritual to keep them safe. You ever been on a boat before, Lucas? Asked the burly man on the pier. Dangerous work. A man's liable to go over the side if he ain't careful. I ran my hands through my mop of auburn hair. I had sent in an application months before and told the captain I had no experience on the water, but maybe he didn't see that part. It had worried me at that moment that I may be about to lose the job before I even started. No, sir, I reply, I have no experience on a boat. I know how to swim and have spent time at the lakes back home, but nothing like this. Captain Orange furrowed his brow as he looked me over. It was hard to determine his age. All of his hair had gone gray, and his face was lined with deep wrinkles. His body was a stout rack of muscle. He was either in his later years or life on the sea had worn him down. My business manager must not have looked over your application too well, he said dismissively. Crabbing on the Bering Sea ain't a game. You young folks watch some damn show on the Discovery Channel and think it's a quick payday. It ain't. Not sure this is gonna be for you. I grabbed my duffel bag from the wet concrete and turned to walk back to the hotel. My mind raced between the disappointment of rejection and the panic of paying for a plane ticket home. My bank account was nearly drained, and I would have had to use my already taxed credit card. Hang on, he shouted. Be here at 6 in the morning. Tomorrow. It's too damn late for me to find a new deckhand, and you're just gonna have to learn to be useful real quick. If you can't keep up, crab ain't gonna be the only thing we dump at the port. The old man turned and walked back onto the deck of his boat before vanishing into the wheelhouse. F.V. Weeping Widow rocked gently against the pier. I spent the first 2 hours of our trip to the Bering Sea violently dumping my breakfast into the filthy toilet just off the kitchen. Every time I retched, I could hear the other deckhands howl with laughter outside. Captain Orange had told the crew to hit their bunks for a bit of rest before we reached the crabbing grounds, but their laughter and jeers made it clear they had no intention of heeding the advice. It seemed like all of my stomach contents had successfully ejected when pounding began to sound against the thin wooden door. All right, Greenhorn, one of the deckhands shouted. Time to get off your ass and on your feet. We'll be dropping pots soon, and that herring won't hop in the bait bag. Let's move. I could hear the sounds of their voices growing quiet and the thuds of heavy boots heading up the steps onto the deck. Wiping my face on my sleeve, I pushed myself onto my feet and walked out the door. The smell of beer and cigarette smoke nearly made my seasick stomach turn again, but I managed to press the urge back down. Pushing the bulkhead door open, I entered the equipment room where the other hands were slipping into their cold weather gear and waiters. A big man, who I thought was named Jimmy, shoved a bright orange bodysuit into my hands and smacked me on the shoulder. I looked at it in confusion. It was completely different from the gear the other men were wearing. "What's this?" I asked the man. "It doesn't look like the same gear the rest of you have." "That's an immersion suit, son," he responded with mild annoyance. "Captain told us you've never been out to sea before and got no boat experience. Me and all the boys think you'll fall overboard, and this is the only thing likely to save your rookie ass." The other men began to howl laughter again. I began to put on the enormous suit, unsure if it was a joke or not. There was no other gear in the room, so my options were limited. The others began to file out of the bulkhead and onto the deck. After 5 minutes of struggling into the immersion gear, I was finally ready to join them outside. Cutting wind and water slapped my face as soon as I stepped onto the deck. The other hand scurried from crab pots, cinching ropes and checking for holes. Jimmy stood beside an industrial grinder and waved me over. "Grab these bait bags and we'll start lining 'em up over at the pot launch," he said, gesturing to a pile of mesh sacks filled to the brim with ground fish. "Gotta hurry if you want to keep the job." I grabbed as many of the bait bags as I could and began to clumsily waddle toward the launcher at the side of the ship. The immersion suit was unbelievably bulky and made it difficult to bend my legs to walk. My feet slipped and shuffled as I tried to find purchase on the wet deck boards. I had just finished dropping the first load of bait bags when the boat grew silent. The engines had stopped. There was no more hurried noise from the crew who had been readying the crab pots to launch. An electric sensation of fear jolted through my body in the sudden silence. I turned toward the deck to see all 7 deckhands surrounding me in a semicircle. Just as I was about to speak, I heard the door from the wheelhouse open and slam close. Looking up, Captain Orange stood against the railing, hands clenched around the frigid metal, a grim look on his face. "It ain't personal, Lucas," he shouted. "We've got a tradition here on the Weeping Widow. Every 4 or 5 years me and the boys sacrifice a man to the sea. Keeps the rest of us safe from harm. Superstitious, maybe, but we ain't lost a man accidentally in 22 years. That suit'll give you a few hours to get right with whatever God you prayed to." At first I thought it was a joke, but a few of the men pulled work knives from their belts as they all walked toward me. Captain Orange had already turned and walked back into the wheelhouse, slamming the door behind him. The engines roared to life, and the boat jolted forward. "Over the side," Jimmy said, "or the boss'll have to stab you a few times to inspire you." "Please," I screamed at the men as they slowly closed in on me. "Don't do this. Just take me back. I won't tell anyone." They remained silent and continued forward. The first man was in arm's reach and leaned in to grab me. I swung my fist as hard as I could and made contact with the side of his head. He stumbled back, shocked at the unexpected blow. As I prepared myself to throw another blow, the others began to move in faster. While I was distracted by the first man, the others seized the opportunity to tackle me to the railing of the shift. I thrashed violently and hit every man within reach, but it was no good. I felt 2 of them wrap their arms around my ankles and lift me into the air. My hands clenched around the metal railing, and they tipped me over the side. Grip still in place, I slammed against the hull of the ship and looked up in horror. 7 crazed faces stared down at me, smiling with sadistic glee. One of the men began trying to pry my fingers from the rails, but the sudden surge of adrenaline had increased my strength. No matter how hard he pulled my fingers or slammed his fist down, my grip wouldn't break. Then I saw one of the men vanish. He returned moments later with a hammer. Lifting the hammer above his head, he brought it down on my left hand with a sickening crack. White blurs of pain filled my eyes as I heard the sickening crunch. My left hand spasmed in pain and fell from the railing. The weight of my body strained my right arm as I continued to hold on to the rail. My muscles burned with agony as I watched him lift the hammer a second time. The second wave of pain swept my body as the hammer made contact. My vision went black. The splintered bones of my right hand gave way, and I fell to the churning sea below. My loss of consciousness was momentary. I felt as though I slammed against concrete as my body met with the rough waves below. The unimaginable cold encompassed my body almost instantly, and any hope of drifting away to a peaceful death vanished. I began to struggle against the waves and paddled my arms to turn myself upright. Fresh bolts of pain erupted in my hands and shot up my arms as I tried to use them to right myself. In the water, the suit had kept me dry, but the bulk made it nearly impossible to control my movements. Finally, I managed to get myself onto my back and floated on top of the choppy sea. White-capped waves lapped and slammed against me, filling my mouth with briny water and making it difficult to breathe. As soon as I passed over the top of a new wave, I would coast down the back and dip below the water before coming back up and gasping for air. I could see the FV Weeping Widow rocking gently on the waves, and the spotlight moved into the distance. A man was standing at the back of the boat, one arm propped on the railing and the other waving merrily in my direction. It looked like he lowered it to blow me a kiss. "Thank ya, Greenhorn," he shouted with glee. "If my kids knew what ya sacrificed to keep their old man safe, they'd thank ya too." "Please," I shouted. I slipped under the water again. "Come back." Another white cap swells over my head, filling my mouth with salty water. "Don't leave 'em." A larger wave pushed me a few feet under, sending water into my lungs. "I can't, please." The lights vanished over the rolling waves, leaving me in the pitch dark. The water began to come a bit as the wake of the boat settled. My balance returned, and I began to float calmly in the water. Stars burned brightly overhead. I had never been this far away from a city to see them so clearly. They would have been beautiful in any other setting. There in the Bering Sea, the stars would be the only witnesses to my funeral. I drifted for hours. The immersion suit had kept the worst of the cold at bay for a while, but I had eventually started to feel the icy daggers of the frigid water creep into my muscles. I had given up on trying to swim. My body ached, and it hurt to move. Hopelessness had overtaken me, and I simply waited to die. After letting go of the fear and anxiety, I noticed I felt a bit better. The water didn't seem to be as cold now. My body aches were dissipating. I felt almost comfortable. Hypothermia, late stage. Probably it's no way to go, but by the time the false warmth starts filling your body, you're almost thankful. I had decided to close my eyes and rest, and let the ocean take me, and I heard something in the distance, a rumbling sound, a ship's engine. I opened my eyes and scanned the area, and in the distance I could see a dim light. There was a ship passing to my right, too far away to see me, too far away to hear me scream. I rested my hands on my chest as tears filled my eyes. My hands rested on top of a hard, found piece of plastic. Confused, I fumbled at it with my bent and broken fingers until I felt a bump on the side. Pushing it in, the night sky filled with obnoxious light. The damn suit had a strobe. I had been out there for hours and never checked the suit for any gear. There was no telling how many ships might have passed close enough to see it, but in my panic, I never checked Bright flashes of light nearly blinded me as they radiated in the night sky. I shielded my eyes with my crippled hand and turned my head toward the boat passing me by. My mind was foggy, but I thought I could see a spotlight burst to life on the deck. A thin beam of harsh light began to scan the sea all round me. With great effort, I lifted my arms in the air to wave, hoping the reflective tape on the sides of the suit would catch their attention as well. After a few moments, the spotlight fell on me, and I had to shield my eyes completely. The light remained on me for what felt like an eternity, until I could hear the deafening roar of the engine of a ship nearby. Waves began to crash violently against me. Once again, I struggled to keep my head above water and breathe. "This is the United States Coast Guard," a resonating voice called from the ship's loudspeaker. "We will dispatch a rescue team to pull you aboard." A few moments later, I was pulled into an inflatable boat. There were a few men and women on board talking into radios as we sped back to the larger shift. The luminous spotlight followed us the entire way. It was like a light from heaven, carrying me back to safe harbors. I started sobbing uncontrollably. A woman sitting next to me grabbed my hand to comfort me. The pain was excruciating, but I didn't bother telling her about my injuries. I was too relieved to be in the sight of another person that the pain was worth the contact. I squeezed her hand back as best as I could with my shattered fingers. We pulled alongside the Coast Guard boat, and for cables dropped from a crane above, the rescue team started attaching the clasps to the boat, and in moments we were lifting from the choppy sea. Tears flowed freely as we drifted upward to the deck. As we lifted above the sigh, the crane began to swing us onto the deck before gently lowering the boat. A swarm of warmly dressed men and women pulled me from the boat and put me on a stretcher. They chattered back and forth about care measures as my mind swam in the joy of my rescue. "Hey there, big guy," one of the men said. "Can you tell me how you ended up in the drink out there? You're a long way from land." "Thrown overboard," I said in a croaky voice. Grabbing both weeping widow crew tossed me overboard. The man's expression changed from professionally friendly to concerned. "Let me go grab the captain," he said before vanishing through the rest of the crew. A few moments later, a woman stood beside the stretcher as the crew pulled me from my wet suit and wrapped me in blankets. The serious woman held a warm cup of coffee to my lips, and I drank deeply. "Sir, can you please tell me what happened on the FV Weeping Widow?" I told her how the crew had cornered me before throwing me from the boat. She listened intently as I explained to her how I had treaded water for hours and how I had struggled to flag down their passing vessel. She nodded and assured me that I would be safe. Her version of safe differed greatly from mine. I was flown back to the mainland and my hands were treated at a hospital in Anchorage. After my recovery, I was placed on an involuntary psychiatric hold for observation. The crew of the FV Weeping Widow all reported to authorities that I had become unstable after going out to sea. After running a string of crab pots, the captain had given the crew a few hours of rack time. While everyone was in their bunk, I must have snuck to the equipment room, put on the immersion suit, and jumped overboard in an elaborate suicide attempt. None of the crew faced charges, and the hospital eventually released me to fly home. Broken and destitute, I'll never be the same, yet the FV Weeping Widow still sails as it always has, safe from harm.